Hello, everybody. Joining me now is Kevin Gosztola. He's an American journalist whose work focuses on whistleblower and national security cases. Now, besides the Julian Assange court hearings, he's also covered the case of Chelsea Manning, John Kiriakou, Daniel Hale, and others. Kevin is also the managing director of Shatterproof. He produces and co-hosts a weekly podcast, Unauthorized Disclosure. And Kevin, I just want to thank you for coming on the show. We've had quite a busy week, haven't we?
It's been busy, and we've been doing a couple shows together, so that's been nice.
Yep. And let me just pull you up on the screen here. We were just talking about how this quote about from the other day from the live stream we were doing about Abu Qatada and basically the British authorities letting out someone from Al-Qaeda out of Belmarsh prison on house arrest, but you won't see that from Julian Assange. I wanted to start out with just saying, what's one of the worst things that you've seen in the media? I mean, which is a difficult question. I know it's quite open ended, but let's limit it to this round of reporting because we always see some I don't even know what to call it, misinformation, disinformation. It's just terrible reporting about Assange. But what's the worst stuff you've seen this time around, if I may ask?
Well, honestly, I didn't do a whole lot of reviewing of the media coverage of the Assange, of the U.S. appeal hearing against Assange. But if I was going to go forward with any sort of media critique, it would actually be somewhat inverted. So we talked about, and I think it's worth making this point, that more journalists than ever before in this case were tuned in to the proceedings the last week. Right. And that's a big deal. I'm glad that they're there. I think overall it's going to be to the benefit of Assange that more people are tuned in, especially when you consider that some of the people I took note of who were monitoring and reporting were from these courthouse outlets, these court reporters that are actually pretty good when it comes to covering like the legal machinations of these sort of cases. So like Courthouse News, which was one of 5 only outlets that covered the Chelsea Manning trial with me, by the way. They're one of the only outlets that sent a reporter down to Fort Meade to cover her military court-martial on a regular basis. And that reporter was Adam Klasfeld, who's since gone on to do some really good reporting in the circuit courts in New York, in the court system in the Southern District of New York. But in any case, I noticed that they were tuned in, and then I noticed some other people who you typically never see. And I noticed that Michael Isikoff, who was on the byline for the Yahoo News story, was following this appeal hearing and waiting, I believe, for his reporting to be invoked by the defense during the afternoon on that second day. And they ended up running this story that the headline kind of reads like navel gazing, like Yahoo News Report reports on Yahoo News Report being mentioned in the courtroom. But I don't again, I'm not really denigrating it. I'm just saying that it's kind of this like bizarre nature of like if that had happened to me, if like Shadowproof story gets mentioned in courtroom and Shadowproof's reporting on Shadowproof's reporting, that's fine. That'd be okay. but like it's the headline was funny to me because it did have this kind of like looking like in your own reflection. And being really proud of themselves that they were able to get on the stage here. But look, it was important. I will be getting into the details of their reporting, but I think what I came to the conclusion of as I looked at the number of people, first off, usually you see a drop off when you have these court hearings that take place over multiple days. You get a bunch of people who come for the first day, and then the second day they don't show up. You'll see like 20 or 30, maybe even 40% of people are just not even, they don't care. They got what they came to get. They got their news. They got the opening of the proceedings. They reported on it and they're gone. That's happened with the legal hearing when I went to London in February of 2020. And so with the extradition hearing in September 2020, where eventually Judge Vanessa Barretza ruled against the extradition, all those witnesses were brought forward, everything. We saw maybe, a few dozen journalists, honestly. And then for this for these 2 days, much, much shorter than the month, we had at least 3 times the number of journalists, if not more, who were paying attention. Again, I'm glad that they're there, but it shows a lot. It shows, one, that mainstream coverage of the issues at stake in this case really pays off. I believe that Michael Isikoff and the Yahoo News people who put their resources behind doing this reporting renewed. I say that word renewed. I caught myself last time saying this. It's not really renewed interest. It's a new level of interest in the extradition case. It's awakening people to issues in this case that haven't been brought forward before. And now they're taking it as credible that the CIA plotted to kidnap or kill Julian Assange and did so potentially through this private security company in Spain that was ostensibly performing security for the Ecuador embassy. And so with Yahoo News putting their stamp on it and saying, okay, an establishment-backed outlet believes that our sources have confirmed this happened, we now have numerous journalists going, huh? All right, I guess I'm going to have to look into this a little bit more closely. They wouldn't listen to us before, but now with Michael Isikoff and Yahoo News on the beat, they're willing to take this seriously. And that's more of a statement on the media, on media culture than it is like a knock on Michael Isikoff. But I will say this. Michael Isikoff is somebody who's a co-author of a book with David Korn on so many Russian conspiracy theories that were peddled in the last 3 to 4 years about Donald Trump and his administration. And I believe he's since backed off a lot of what he thought he was uncovering during the Trump administration, that, it's all fallen apart. And we see now, as we are recording this isn't like the subject of our discussion today, but we see now that the FBI or the Justice Department is now indicting people for the fabricated allegations that they made against Donald Trump's administration that were built around a political agenda, and that they were spinning a total yarn. And some of this relates to what they've said about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange being a Russian plant. And so Michael Isikoff was a participant. And I'm saying this is an indictment of the entire US media. While this case was unfolding, especially from April 2019 forward, when Julian Assange was expelled, while this case was unfolding, people like Michael Isikoff and other journalists were spending their time on Russiagate rather than digging into what the national security state's doing to a journalist. And I welcome them. I'm glad they're here now. I'm glad they're no longer peddling Russiagate smears and that they're here. I just hope that they are able to see what we see. And if they don't, I hope that they ask us questions or ask me questions like they used to do in the courtroom at Fort Meade. And I'll help them understand what's going on because I know that they haven't been here as long as I have.
Yeah, I mean, everything you laid out is, I couldn't agree more. And it is a bit annoying that it takes an establishment outlet to give it a stamp of approval, so to speak, in order for the judges to take it seriously. But, we'll take the wins as they come. It's a win for the case and the truth, just simply the truth getting out. And, something about so just to clear it up for those who don't know, although I would be surprised if no one has heard of it until now because we even covered it on the channel. But we're referring to the Yahoo News story where, as Kevin pointed out, they were discussing plans to potentially kidnap or kill Assange. There's something in that article, Kevin, I wanted to ask you about. There's a line that says that these ideas predated Mike Pompeo's arrival. What do you make of that? Like, are they talking by an entire administration? By how much? And what does that mean for the things that you and I heard in court, that basically the Obama administration had ruled out prosecuting Assange because they knew they'd have to go after everyone else if they did this? And, the other things that we heard, the other arguments about just taking the whole case forward in general.
Yeah, that's an important detail. And in fact, we know that the conversations about potentially labeling people, journalists like Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald, as information brokers while they were involved in doing reporting on Edward Snowden's documents, NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden's documents, that was a part of the Obama administration. And that is now a part of the Obama administration's legacy. The idea that there would have been a discussion about assassinating Assange in order to prevent the further publication of documents, I think is troubling. And it suggests that the CIA was involved in these discussions before the Trump administration. And maybe they escalated and increased in regularity during the Trump administration. But this agency, which we know has quite a history of working extrajudicially, extra-legally in the way that it conducts itself, whether we're referring to the torture program or it's go back numerous decades when they actually carried out assassination plots against leaders of countries, especially anti-colonial leaders in the global South. And this is just, I think it just shows how history continues on, and you can draw a through line. I mean, the whole history of the CIA isn't that much of a squiggly line up. It's fairly constant. If you're able to tamp down on the kind of brutality and violence that it metes out, it's only for a short period, because then they find a way to get back to it, or they find a way to legalize them. I mean, the drone program right now is just legalized murder. And we know that, we saw yesterday that the Pentagon has investigated itself and determined that they didn't commit a crime when they killed the humanitarian aid worker, or that aid worker and his family, and there were 7 children that were killed. But that's the Pentagon. The Pentagon investigated itself. That's not the CIA. The CIA has another program, and we don't have any idea what the CIA's program is doing. And so, we're not even getting to the issue of the CIA and drones when we react viscerally to the Pentagon not reviewing itself, or not holding itself accountable. So I think the problem for me with the Obama administration is that it didn't shut down the case into Julian Assange. Let's be very clear. There was a grand jury investigation that was launched in 2010 in the Eastern District of Virginia, where Julian Assange will likely be put on trial if he's brought to the United States. And while they were prosecuting Chelsea Manning in a military court system, they had this parallel investigation, which we saw some news headlines periodically, like when they were seizing internet data from people who were associates of WikiLeaks, like trying to take anything from their Google accounts, or there were other like Dynadot. There were all kinds of different people who received these companies that received subpoenas from the FBI for data. They were going after people who had worked on WikiLeaks releases. And we knew that people received subpoenas. They had an open grand jury. And then around 2013, we have the story in the news media. I believe the Washington Post reports that they're basically going to put this on hold. They feel there's a New York Times problem if they go forward and prosecute WikiLeaks. And Eric Holder doesn't really want to continue this. And I think that's also owed to the fact that they're getting a lot of pressure from media organizations for the extent to which they were relying on the Espionage Act to prosecute whistleblowers in order to stop leaks, in order to stop people from talking about what was going on in the Obama administration. So they're worried that that's tarnishing the legacy of Obama, and they back away and don't indict Julian Assange. But as we're seeing, the fact that they didn't come out and do a press conference and say, we're no longer going to investigate Julian Assange, it left it open for the Justice Department to just have it dormant. And then what happens is Donald Trump gets elected, and because you have like a corporate Wall Street attorney like Eric Holder, who just goes off to work in New York City, and then the people who come in with the Trump administration who are against very clearly principles of press freedom and do believe that they should go to war against journalists to protect the security state, like openly go to war against journalists to protect the security state. Then Jeff Beauregard Sessions, who is this cartoonish Southern figure who takes over the Justice Department as the Attorney General, I'm telling you, I didn't take him seriously. I thought like he would never be in a position of power in the United States. He used to say these profoundly ridiculous things. I'm sorry I don't have a clip available and queued up to play here for your viewers, but he used to talk about how there needed to be laws passed in the United States to stop leaks, like an Official Secrets Act. You know, he backed ridiculous reactionary legislation that was proposed by Joe Lieberman after WikiLeaks put out the document caches from Chelsea Manning. And I didn't take it seriously because nobody in the Senate really took Jeff Sessions seriously. And then Trump came along and gave him a position. And now he was able to revive the WikiLeaks prosecution, or the prosecution against Julian Assange. And not only that, he was able to make leak prosecutions accelerate 3 to 4 times the rate of the Obama administration. And they even instituted a counterintelligence unit in the FBI that could crack down on whistleblowers. So that foundation was laid by Obama. And then Trump just came into office and said, well, let's take this baby to 150 miles an hour.
Yeah. And I mean, if we look at the similarities between the administrations, I mean, you know, Biden just comes in and picks off where Trump left off because, you know, one could argue that Trump really ramped it up. As you just said, we're going to 2-3 times what it was under Obama. And even under Obama, he was setting a record. He was setting a precedent of, you know, prosecuting journalists, whistleblowers. But now it's just there's continuity. And I mean, it doesn't bode well if we're putting it mildly. And I mean, just going back to the Yahoo News story, there was a moment in court, which we talked about the other day, where the judges were kind of, I don't know what it was. I don't know if they were like genuinely confused or something, but you know, they were basically, the defense was basically trying to explain that there's an article, you know, with 30 U.S. officials confirming that the CIA was planning to kill our client, our defendant. And I think the judges, they didn't grasp it exactly. They're like, yeah, well, of course the CIA has an interest in Assange. And then they're like, no, you don't get it. They have a really, really special interest in Assange. What did you think of that moment? And why do you think the judges reacted like that?
It was jarring. I think it has to do with the client state mentality of the UK court system, because I think they know that to speak about this openly requires them to take certain actions that they're not prepared to take. Now, I frankly believe that whatever the outcome, you know, it's possible that they do uphold the lower court decision by Vanessa Barretzer. And I think that the defense team for Julian Assange makes it pretty clear that at least on this narrow part of the decision that is the focus of the US appeal, not the 75 to 80%, which we really should be talking about, but the 10 to 15% that says, let's save his life because it's going to be oppressive for mental health reasons. Now, you look at that and you look at the consideration of all the doctors and you look at why she prefers one doctor over the other and you go through it, you really can tell that she's doing this thoroughly. She's not just making a mistake to throw the case and create an opening for the US government to win at the appeal court level, which, if you believe in conspiracies, is something that a judge with a career focus could do so that she could also absolve herself of responsibility and not be the one who extradited him to the United States and had, you know, blood on her hands if he killed himself. So I think that she actually very seriously put this decision together, and it's not just like she was finding an escape hatch for herself. But these judges are listening to these allegations and what's reported in this Yahoo News report. And I think they know that if they're really going to follow this, they're going to have to oppose the US government. And not only the US government, but we're going to have to oppose the security agents within the US government who are capable of, as we're talking about, committing acts of brutal violence, because these are people, not only do they apply pressure to dissidents and activists and people who are opposed to what they do, people who support socialist governments, etc. But also, this is an agency that will use the Justice Department and the State Department to pressure other governments not to investigate them and hold them accountable, whether we're talking about renditions or torture. We also see from the Pentagon and the CIA that they'll work together to pressure other governments not to investigate war crimes. And so with that stated, I think the UK court knows that if they rule against the US government, then they're on the other side. They're against the CIA. They have to worry about being against the national security state in the US. And that is a problem in their heads. And I don't know if they're comfortable in being adversarial. And I can hear it in the way that they react to the arguments from the defense, that I don't know which way they're going to go, but they sort of left themselves room to go in a couple different directions, which is to say, if they think this is a unique case, then maybe they would rule in favor of Julian Assange and say that this doesn't have much precedent for other cases and they're just doing this for one individual. But if they think that they're going to be setting a precedent, then I believe that they're really concerned and they don't want the Julian Assange extradition case to become something that future defendants, future people who are facing extradition to the United States get to use in order to challenge the US government. And so I noticed that when they say things, when the defense attorney said things like, this is similar to other cases, they were quick to say, no, it wasn't, because again, like if they agree that the same as previous cases, then they have no choice but to reject what the US government is appealing. And, I could tell that I just get the sense that they're uncomfortable with challenging the US government. But the fact of the matter is that what is before them may lead them into an uncomfortable cul-de-sac. And the only choice that they have is to rule against the US government.
Yeah, I remember that with Lori Love. They're very quick to say, well, it was determined that he wouldn't commit suicide in the future, like trying to, differentiate the cases, as you pointed out. And Kevin, you mentioned the 80 or 90% that we should be talking about in this case, which I'm assuming and I'm pretty sure means everything else that isn't Assange's health, because the extradition being halted shouldn't just hinge on his health. So speaking of the political charges, the Espionage Act, the conspiracy to commit computer intrusion and all this, what about a cross appeal? I've been wondering myself if we're going to see a cross appeal because, from what I understood, I mean, obviously, if you just leave it to the health issue, they're going to rely on other cases, and that's not a complete guarantee. Gary McKinnon wasn't really saved by the courts. Lori Love, they're already saying they don't want to, they don't feel the cases are similar. What about a cross appeal? Do you think we'll see one? And how important is it to see one? That's kind of a rhetorical question, but
the illegal team has already asked for a cross appeal. And we've seen some of the reasons why they believe they should get to appeal. I know that there are questions of law as to whether they should be able to appeal, because right now they're actually in the winning position. So I think there's some question about, can you appeal a decision in which you actually got a verdict that was favorable to you, the accused? But setting that aside, because I'm not a lawyer and I'll leave that to somebody who really wants to get in those weeds. I do believe that the cross appeal is something we need to hold out hope that they'll be able to pursue. Though I do recognize that if Julian Assange won this case, given what he's been through, the psychological torment, if he finally gets to the end of all of this and the US has no options to appeal anymore, and he's faced with the prospect of being able to walk free and go live with his family, Stella Morris and his two children, who he's really been able to spend very little time with since facing this arbitrary detention and this campaign against him to destroy his life. If he decides that he just wants to go live in peace with them and not pursue a cross appeal, I wouldn't fault him for making that choice. Yeah. It would have a great impact on journalists because it would remain as precedent that affected. If he doesn't have to be in the courtroom for this cross appeal, that might be the best possible scenario so that he could get on with living the way he would like. And then his lawyers could try to undo this this effectively horrible precedent that is really kind of has a great chilling effect on people's ability to exercise their right to practice adversarial journalism. And then they could bring those arguments in the appeals court. But I understand that the cross appeal can't really happen until the U.S. appeal has run its course. And then what gets really convoluted here is if they lose the appeal. So if Assange loses at this stage, this is how I'm understanding it now. This is what is so ridiculous about all of this. If they lose, then they go to the UK Supreme Court and they can talk about all of the political charges. They can talk about everything in this case. I mean, they're going to be appealing what the High Court of Justice said, but I think they believe that there's a lot in the case that they can bring back into the courtroom if they have to pursue an appeal before the Supreme Court. It won't be a cross appeal. It'll be different, but they'll be able to raise some issues that weren't just focused to what the U.S. is narrowly appealing.
And, when it comes to the United States winning the case, they're hedging their bets on these diplomatic assurances, as they've been calling them. And I think you'll recall in court, we saw the lead prosecutor, Lewis, saying that these are solemn undertakings at the highest level and they're not dished out like Smarties. I mean, given the United States history, we just saw them, for example, kidnap the Venezuelan diplomat, Alex Saab. And you went into the CIA's history, but just generally speaking, I mean, what was your take on these assurances? Because if we look at what they've done to other prisoners who were given so-called assurances, not diplomatic ones, but nevertheless, they were misled, weren't they? And if we look at what they do to what they did to Daniel Hale just a few months ago, as you covered, and Chelsea Manning, as you covered, I mean, do you lend these diplomatic assurances any credence above other assurances?
We've talked about all these assurances, and they've gotten a lot of attention over the last week or two because of the fact that they have loopholes. All four of these assurances have significant loopholes. It's like each of them were offered with a disclaimer. It's kind of like getting a product that has a guarantee and then reading at the bottom that there's fine print. That means that you don't really have a guarantee on that product. These assurances are very corporate in the way that they were conceived. Like, we don't want to be asked to do too much, but we will do this much, but we may not even do that much, like that sort of a thing. But I'll start with the more generic thing that we should really look at, which is the UK government is supposedly the government that would represent Julian Assange's interests if he did not think the US government upheld the assurances that are given by the US government. So in other words, what we see in the United States' argument to the High Court of Justice that we should trust the US government's assurances is that he would have the ability to file some kind of a challenge if he didn't believe that they were being upheld. And he would first go to the UK government and they would tell the US government that Julian Assange says he isn't getting the medical care he needs, or he believes it's wrong that he's been put in special administrative measures, or that he's in these restrictive solitary conditions in Alexandria Detention Center while waiting to be put on trial. And that is ridiculous because the UK government, I can't imagine wanting to be any sort of ally of Julian Assange, given what they've done. Well, first off, this isn't really even about the case, but we know from Italian journalist Stefania Marizzi that the UK government has actively fought Freedom of Information Act requests for basic details about what these services in the country, like the Crown Prosecution Service, I think she might have even asked for records from the police department, what they were doing in order to target people who are associates of WikiLeaks, like Christian Harafson, who's now the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, Joseph Farrell, Sarah Harrison, who's, by the way, is an unindicted co-conspirator in the latest indictment in this case, something that is concerning. And so she's asked for these records, and they won't give them to her. And then also, we know that there are records that have been destroyed historically related to the Assange extradition, going back to the Swedish case. But in the last decade, we know that there are records that no longer exist because the government actually destroyed those records. And this is the government we're supposed to believe will advocate for Assange to the US government, that he should not be mistreated and that his human rights should be upheld. It's laughable. And there's no reason why the High Court of Justice should take it seriously that the UK government is going to represent Julian Assange. But I find myself recognizing that the countries that are all involved in this, when you think of who has stakes to play in all of it, Ecuador sort of gets tossed aside, but they did originally give him political asylum, and then they took that away and they removed his citizenship. So I think that they have some responsibility, but more importantly, the Australian government has a responsibility to Julian Assange as an Australian citizen and has utterly failed him as the citizen of their country. Now, you would think it would be Australia that would argue on his behalf to the United States that certain things needed to be done to protect his human rights, and that they would be concerned he would not receive a fair trial in the US. But it's almost like because the US is able to extradite him from UK and not Australia, that they're able to get around all of these issues that they might have if Australia, was advocating for him because he was an Australian citizen. So we really have this, I see this case as one of these incredible examples where essentially Assange has been rendered stateless. It's like he has no home. It's like he doesn't belong to anywhere. There's no government in the world that will stick up for him while the US is trying to get him extradited and, put the final nails in his coffin. And that, to me, is one of the most alarming aspects of this, because the whole thing of he's part of a non-state hostile intelligence service, and that's how we're going to discredit WikiLeaks, the CIA's way of going after WikiLeaks. We sort of see that on full display throughout the course of this case against him, because there is no government that feels they have to stick up for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just going back to what you said with Stefania Marizzi, I was in court with her when she was getting the judgment on whether journalists, or actually not just journalists, anyone who's outside the UK can request a Freedom of Information Act or make a Freedom of Information Act request. And she won it, actually, along with other people who were challenging this. And it's extraordinary because basically even myself as a British citizen, I wouldn't have been allowed to make a FOIA request because I'm outside the UK, from my own government. So, I mean, that's the level to which they want to, as you mentioned, they've destroyed things, and that's the level to which they want to keep things secret. But thankfully, this has been challenged successfully in court. And I mean, I totally agree with you. He's been rendered stateless. I think Ecuador. So they gave him citizenship. Then they wanted to give him diplomatic immunity, but the UK refused to register him as a diplomat, and then he lost his citizenship just recently. And Australia, as you said, doesn't stick up for him. This whole notion that he could go serve his sentence in Australia. I mean, only someone who reads the New York Times would believe that, because we know that Australia has made no indication. Like, it's really to that point, as you mentioned. They won't even say that they'll take Assange. So this is really just, it's dreary. And I think that even if Australia accepted that, it's unacceptable. Like, why should he be in jail on the moon or in Australia or Ecuador or wherever? It's just really unacceptable. Kevin, we heard things in court about how Assange could communicate with other prisoners above and below, seemingly through the plumbing. I mean, Kronberg insists that administrative segregation is not isolation. So, what do you think of not just administrative segregation, but the other types of hellholes they could put Assange in? Is a CMU or an SHU really that different from ADX? You also covered Chelsea Manning's trial and Daniel Hill. So, they have a way of putting these people through enormous suffering, don't they?
Yeah. So let's take Chelsea Manning, who I think they very conveniently want to pretend the U.S. government didn't support prosecuting. It was like they say, oh, the military did it. She went through the military court-martial. So let's not consider that alongside this case as if it would somehow be different. In fact, I would suggest to you that because she went through the military, she actually got better due process than she would in a federal court. I think there are things that she was, and it sounds absurd when I know that around the world, the U.S. military's face is one of dropping bombs on civilians. It's one of committing war crimes. It's one of torturers. It's one of soldiers who take trophies from the scenes of massacres and display them and fly flags that are either racist or white supremacist. And they do things that show a side of the United States that is profoundly ugly. But I can tell you from following it that the court-martial system is a meticulous system that gives pretty good space to somebody who's accused of crimes to defend themselves. And you don't have to take my word for it from covering the Chelsea Manning case. Think of how much latitude you have if you're accused of war crimes as a U.S. soldier to defend yourself in a court and to make it seem like you didn't do anything wrong. So you have a lot of ability as a soldier accused of a crime to challenge what the military is saying about you. Now, I'm not saying that played out in that way in Chelsea's case, but I'm saying that I think that there are avenues available to her that she would not have had during if she was prosecuted in federal court. And then the most important thing that James Lewis does not want the High Court of Justice to think about is that after she had her sentence commuted by President Barack Obama, it wasn't long after that she received a grand jury subpoena to go testify against Julian Assange because Gordon Kronberg in the Eastern District of Virginia wanted to make her incriminate herself or turn against Julian Assange, and she was his source. So they wanted to have this amazing thing happen where a source turned against the journalist that she had gone and given documents to. And that she didn't do it. She didn't agree to do it. And no matter what people think she believes about Julian Assange, and no matter how people feel she, won't speak up enough about this case, she went through untold amounts of suffering for a year in a jail, refusing to cooperate with this grand jury. And toward the end, she attempted suicide. Yet again, another time she had attempted suicide when she was at Fort Leavenworth serving her sentence, her military prison sentence. So again, this put her in a position where she was near a psychotic break and she attempted suicide. And she did that because of the conditions of her jailing, her detention, while she was resisting a grand jury subpoena. She didn't know when she was going to be released. She ended up being released a few days after attempting suicide. This happened to her. If it happened to her, it could happen to Julian Assange while he is awaiting trial. This is the same jail that Daniel Hale was sent to while awaiting sentencing. They put him in there because they wanted to make everyone believe that his post-traumatic stress that he has from the moral injury of being involved in the drone program was something that was driving him crazy, and he was going to do self-harm to himself. His therapist actually ratted him out to pretrial services, and he ended up being thrown in jail and not able to prepare himself for going to prison. Do things like find a home for his cat, take care of any bills that he had, outstanding payments, put all of his things in order so that he could then go to prison. Something that a lot of people get to do when they know that they're going to be going off to prison. And they deprived him of his ability to do that. He was just picked up, taken to a jail, and he hasn't been free since. And now he's in a CMU, a communications management unit. And there he is in conditions that, in terms of social visits, it's actually worse than special administrative measures. It's been described as worse by the Center for Constitutional Rights because you do not have contact visits with any individuals who come to see you. So immediate family come, Stella, her children, his children come, Gabriel and Max, and he's on the other side of a partition. There's glass. He speaks, I think he grabs the telephone, think of like the movies where they talk through the glass. He never gets to touch. He never gets to hug. He doesn't get to kiss his kids. They don't get to sit on his lap. He doesn't get to share any moments with them while he is in this facility, if he gets sentenced to a CMU. And so fortunately for Daniel, he does not have children, and he's not married to anybody. And he, I'm sure there are immediate family members he would love to be able to give a hug to, etc. But he won't be able to do that. But what I'm saying is I think it would be far worse for Julian Assange because he's trying to build a family, and this would be highly disruptive to him if he's in a CMU after being sentenced. And that's worse. That's worse than SAMS. People in SAMS do not have this restriction of not being able to hug. We don't actually know why this exists. This is something the Center for Constitutional Rights has challenged. There is no security reasoning behind it. They won't tell you, if you ask the Bureau of Prisons, they won't tell you why people can't hug, kiss, touch each other like you do in a normal visitor's room when people come to visit you in a federal prison. And so that's something that would be that Assange would face with, along with any calls he wants to make. He has to wait until an FBI agent is available if he's put in a CMU. And you get three, I think it's 2 calls, maybe 3 calls, two 15-minute calls per week, if that, that you're able to make. And they can restrict it to immediate family. So there's a whole range of people in his support network who he can talk to while he's in Belmarsh right now, who would be on a blacklist if he was put in a U.S. prison, the CMU wing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really astonishing to me is just the disregard. There's really a callous disregard for mental health and all this. I mean, you mentioned Daniel Hale, for example, his therapist ratting him out. I mean, this is one of the the worst things you could probably do to someone who's confided in you. And I really, really struggle to see how as you mentioned, putting him in such restrictive, oppressive conditions is good for security, and B, how it's good for his mental health. How is exactly stopping him from being able to hug someone who visits him or his family good for his mental health? I mean, if anything, it's going to make it worse. And we're seeing this, of course, play out with what they did to Chelsea Manning, and of course, driving her to commit suicide or to attempt to commit suicide, and driving Julian Assange also to worsen his mental health. And it's just astonishing how they treat mental health like it's some kind of joke. I think they must know to some degree that this is oppressive and just completely damaging for one's spirit and mental health. And with Julian, I think people see things in the New York Times, for example, that the United States is offering assurances. And they don't understand that, they have ways of wiggling out of it. Like you and I heard in the courtroom, they're already giving disclaimers. And I think what was really astonishing to me is when they talked about Abu Hamza, Lewis was so callous. He's like, well, we didn't say we won't put him in ADX. We said we might not put him in ADX. So we didn't breach the assurances. They're so corporate in it. I think that's the word you used. And I couldn't agree more. It's really astonishing. People don't read read the fine print, it seems. Besides an ASHU, besides a CMU, what else could they do? I mean, administrative segregation is pretty much guaranteed. If you ask me, SAMs are also guaranteed. Do you also feel that way, that it's guaranteed for Assange?
Well, the other thing we should be concerned about, and Kronberg lays it out very clearly, is that Assange could be put in protective custody because he's a high-profile prisoner. And what that means is they get to do all sorts of things that they did to Chelsea Manning when she was first detained and was awaiting trial. You remember the international scandal that was sparked by her treatment at the Quantico Marine Brig, which has since been shut down. It actually does not exist. There are not people detained there anymore. And so, and in that facility, I remember they took her clothing away. They took her underwear away. They took, they made her wear the suicide smock, which I saw displayed during the court martial. I saw her put it on and demonstrate what it was like. It's just like itchy, uncomfortable thing that like nobody would be comfortable sleeping in, and especially in a prison. And they did this to her by twisting her words against her and reading into it the worst intentions. It was sarcasm, or she was talking about, like, if you're going to do this to me, I could take the elastic in my waistband and I could do this with it. And then just, I guess, to be a smart aleck, the military person who was overseeing her treatment decided, well, we need to take this seriously and take all of the clothing away. And when they called roll in the morning, she came out of her cell and she's completely naked, and everyone else has on what they were wearing in the prison. And everyone, the people who are doing security for that prisoner sort of like, why does this inmate not have any clothing on? And it was something that led to PJ Crowley at the State Department speaking out against it. He eventually resigned. This was a scandal worldwide. And Juan Mendez, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, before Niels Meltzer was the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, did a full report on the abusive, the cruel and inhuman treatment that Chelsea Manning experienced at Quantico. And so she was treated like that as part of protective custody, the idea that they had to make sure no matter what, she survived and made it to her trial. Don't think they won't do the same thing to Julian Assange. They will say that they are putting him in restrictive conditions to protect his own safety in order to prevent him from doing anything to himself. They will take his mental health. They will use all of the worst claims that the defense has made to try and save him, and they will turn them against Julian Assange so that he is even more miserable, if you can believe it. And you may not think, how could you be more miserable? They will find a lower low that they can take this while he is in confinement.
Yeah. And I think just a quick note on being subpoenaed back into custody. I think people need to understand that what happened to Chelsea Manning can happen to Assange, right? Even if he's acquitted, Kronberg could, as we talked about before, as you mentioned, basically summon Assange before a grand jury, and if he refuses, he indicts him he will jail him for civic contempt. I think that's probably also in store for him if he is acquitted, which I don't really see happening.
Yeah. So let's play out the scenario just for the sake of discussion. If the trial comes to an end, and let's say, for example, a jury decides that Julian Assange is not guilty, or I don't know if they might go with a bench trial, which means in the US that the judge would do the decision. Sometimes you trust the judge to apply the law. This is a novel case. You may not want to let people's prejudice be brought into it. You may not want to risk that 12 jurors who have been poisoned by the US mainstream media are sitting there and are going to hear this case and already have made up their minds about Julian Assange. So you might confine it to a judge who you may say there's more chance that they would apply the law narrowly. This is what Chelsea Manning did. She did not have a trial. The judge, the military judge, reviewed it. And yes, she did get a 35-year sentence, but crucially was not found guilty of aiding the enemy. Did not get that charge, which carried a life sentence if she was found guilty. It was equal to treason if she had been found guilty of aiding the enemy. So again, not to say that I'm proud of what the judge did in that case, but just to say that there is a good strategy in saying we just would like the judge to rule. So let's say he gets acquitted. He is then, while the courtroom is emptying, arrested immediately. It is found that he has been subpoenaed. As you say, he would be brought before a grand jury, and then he would be asked to testify. And this isn't entirely speculative or that out of the range of possibility. I mean, it is speculative, but it's not out of the range of possibility, because we have heard crazy things like let's say Wolf Blitzer on CNN, or even anybody else talking about, could he be brought to the U.S. to testify on Russiagate so that Robert Mueller could find out information that he doesn't know already.
Oh, no.
When he was indicted and arrested, CNN spent a large part of their coverage talking about this nutty idea that being brought to the U.S. would help the Mueller investigation, because they could subpoena him while he was in a jail cell to testify and give and then like the idea that he would cooperate with the FBI is a lunacy on its own. But because he has no obligation to speak with anybody. I don't know why he would want to talk unless they were saying, we'll drop these charges, you tell us what we know. I mean, I don't know if he would take the deal, but that's the only way I could see him having any interest in talking to the special counsel involved in this investigation. But they're so addled, they're so poisoned that they're like, if he comes to the US, maybe we could get him and we could find out the truth about what Donald Trump is up to with Vladimir Putin. And that maybe he holds the key. Maybe he'll just really break this wide open. And that would be what Julian Assange could do. And I don't know why he would do that for you. You hate him. You've piled on so many character assassinations after character assassinations on him. And you want him to come give you this thing that can finally blow this thing wide open. I get over yourselves. But but seriously, more seriously than Russiagate is that he might be subpoenaed for another set of documents that was published. Let's say the Vault 7 documents on the CIA's cyber warfare tools. And they did not expose the tools themselves for people to use, but they had many details about what the CIA is able to do, things like planting malware, adding fingerprints to hacks. This is important, related to Russiagate, make it seem like you're hacking and you put a Russian fingerprint on it, or you could put a Chinese fingerprint on it, and then they could blame it on another government for being involved in the hack if the security agents wanted to commit some kind of a cyber operation. And so he could be subpoenaed and forced to testify. He could even be charged with a crime related to that set of documents, because it would not bring into the issue of double jeopardy. They would be charging him with uncharged misconduct. So that's something they have to hold over him, is if you are not found guilty of this, there are these other sets of documents in which we could try to bring another case against you. And they may not even care that they would lose again, because we've seen throughout this that the value is the punishment by process.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they, most people don't even understand what this indictment is about, that it's related to Iraq war logs, Afghan war diary, and the cables. And they think it's about 2016, but actually first of all, I mean, there's nothing there with 2016, but Vault 7 is really something we know the CIA are angry about. So I really fail to see why they wouldn't use that against him. Kevin, just as a last question, perhaps, a lot of people ask you and me when we might get a decision on Assange, how long a decision might take. When you or I were talking last time, you pulled up this very big chart of all the possibilities. I want to put it on the screen now. Maybe walk us through this behemoth and the possibilities of what we're looking at here.
Yes. So if you look down at the left part of the screen toward the middle, you'll see that it says the U.S. appeals to the High Court. That's where we are. We're also, I think there's another box that has U.S. appeals to the High Court. But that's not the same route. Anyways, if you go down to the bottom here, now where you're circling, there are 3 actions that can happen. The court can dismiss it. Well, then what's going to happen is the US will appeal and it'll go before the Supreme Court. If it accepts these assurances, these diplomatic assurances that we do not find to be of any value, then it'll potentially go back down to the district court level. And so you basically go back to go and you have a hearing before, I hope it would be a different judge and not Vanessa Baretzer, but I suppose things have been kind of bizarre already. So maybe she gets to have another crack at it. But again, I would think that it would be a different judge. It should be. And they would have a hearing on these assurances and discuss why the legal team for Assange would have a hearing, much like the extradition hearing in September 2020. And they would say, look, we're sorry we have to do this. We don't like being here. The US should have put these forward a long time ago, but now they have. And we're here to put evidence and bring forward witnesses and say that we do not believe that these assurances should be taken seriously. And then the judge would review them and decide based on those assurances whether to reject the extradition request or not. And then the appeals continue and we go back to the High Court for another hearing. And then we go back to the UK Supreme Court for another hearing. And then that's the last stage. I don't think the Foreign Secretary has any power anymore, like what Theresa May did in McKinnon's case. I think they took that away. And it's actually that the Supreme Court has the final say when it comes to extraditions. They've sort of removed the ability of a political appointee to really check and hold the judicial system accountable if they believe that something wrong has unfolded. Because I think they're saying that it's unfair to the requesting state to go against what the court has decided. But I also think that's unfortunate because it's actually good to know that someone in the foreign secretary's position could step in. But then in this case, it might work in Julian Assange's favor because that person who's foreign secretary, who is probably I don't know who it is right now, you probably do, but the person who's a foreign secretary, if they're hostile to Julian Assange, could reverse the UK Supreme Court and decide to okay the extradition. So anyways,
it would be the Home Secretary, and that's Priti Patel, and she's not a nice person. So I really don't have any hope.
So we're probably glad that Priti Patel has no chance of deciding the future of Julian Assange based on what we've heard in these hearings. Yeah, she can do other things to make his life miserable. And she can, as you've talked about yourself, threaten journalists with an Official Secrets Act expansion. Right. But beyond that, she can't really do anything more to make it so Assange can't go free. So as you can tell, it's dizzying. And if you feel overwhelmed, I think you're meant to feel overwhelmed. I think like the whole process, it's meant to make you feel like you're drowning, and that way you just disengage. So if you're one of those people who listen to a conversation like this and you just go, this is too much. I can't. I don't really know what to do. Look, tell me when he's being extradited or not extradited. But until then, I really don't think I can follow this. This is just too confusing. I kind of understand why that's your attitude, because there's a lot going on in the world. And if you're opposed to it, you may say look, I'm just opposed to it. Wake me up when we get to the point when he's actually going to be extradited. But I want to pull you back in and say that it's important to be there at every stage and to speak out against what's happening and to be part of the group of people that follows independent journalists like Richard and myself, because we need to constantly remind people of what's going on. And I believe it's Caitlin Johnstone who has done, she's got one line that she's really hit hard the whole time that this case has been unfolding, which is that the Julian Assange case and Julian Assange himself is so important when it comes to US empire, because it exposes everything. No matter what you think of Julian Assange, there's something profound about the ability of this one single individual in this one single case to be able to show us, warts and all, everything that is terrible about the United States. And I mean, there isn't a thing that the U.S. government does that we can't talk about and tie back to Julian Assange. I mean, it sounds kind of like a game, but like if somebody wanted to make suggestions here and we just took those suggestions and ran with them, I don't think anyone would be able to come up with something if they were, again, doing this in good faith and not just trying to play gotcha games. But like if they were seriously playing along, I don't think there is much that they could put forward and say, tell me about this issue. How would you tie that to Assange? I'm pretty confident I could tie anything that anybody said back to this case, because Assange and WikiLeaks have had this effect of exposing the full range of every single activity that the U.S. engages in around the world.
I couldn't agree more. And I was even seeing something earlier. Stella Morris posted about the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. You know, WikiLeaks has done it all, really. And Kevin, so speaking of following those who are covering the case, where can people follow your work? Where can they read more about what you're doing and get your social media? I have your Twitter up, so I'll pull that up. But where else can people go to follow your brilliant stuff?
Well, I'll just tell you that I have this, it's in my bio there. You'll see the dissenter.org. I have this Dissenter newsletter. It's a free newsletter, and you could subscribe, and everything that I do that I send out, right there, you can see I did a story on the EPA. But if you go there, all my reporting on the WikiLeaks case or the case against Julian Assange, like you can see, I did 2 reports. And let me just give a shout as we are concluding to Mohammed Almazi, who is based in London. I collaborated with him during the appeal hearing. He does some fine work covering this, as well as some other stories of great importance in the UK. So yeah, you can find my work at thedissenter.org.
Mohammed is great, and so are you, Kevin. Really, I've had so much fun. I mean, even though the subject matter is not the most euphoric, but I've had so much fun doing these talks with you, you know, on Katie Halper's show and then on Alex's podcast. It's really great. So, you know, just thanks for your time. I know you're exhausted like me, but I'm glad we sat down to do this, because there's, you know, I don't think we can talk enough about it. So thank you so much for your time, Kevin. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk later, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. There you have it. Kevin Gosztola. Go follow him on Twitter. I'm going to put up his Twitter again on the screen. Here we go. So that's at K Gosztola. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for being here and tuning into our Assange coverage. Again, I don't think we can talk about this stuff enough. I'm just going to see if you guys have any comments, some extra comments that you wanted me to address. So we got several comments over here, some things that were on last time after I already logged off. I didn't see them, but thank you to Rob, thank you to Florin, thank you to Gary. Really appreciate your support, and I'll cut this stream now so we can come back on later. Okay. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll catch you later. Take care. Bye.